Good day, Liberators, and welcome back to Survival in the Killing Fields. Before I continue, please consider heading over to Patreon and signing up. Your help is greatly appreciated. Chapter 1: Early Rebellions. My earliest memory is standing at the back door of my parents' house and gazing at the rice fields. The fields fascinated me. Low earthen dikes divided them into a pattern like irregular checkered boards, with paddies instead of squares, and trees rising here and there where dikes met. It was a sight that changed with the seasons. By January, partway through the dry season, the fields were covered in brown stubble. By about April or May, when light rains fell, a few paddies were planted as seedbeds, turning a delicate green. When the rainy season itself brought its heavy storms, teams of men and women transplanted the seedlings to the rest of the paddies. Over the rainy months, the rice plants grew thick and green and lush, and the dikes were hidden from sight until around August, when the rain stopped, and the plants gradually began to turn golden. The farmers went out and harvested, leaving only dry stubble behind. They threshed the stalks, milled the grains, and sold the rice to families like mine. We ate the rice gladly, and we always set some aside for the monks who came to our house every morning with their alms bowls. The monks wore robes, yellow or orange or even brown if they had made the dyes themselves from tree bark. Their heads and eyebrows were shaved. They were calm and silent, speaking not a word as they walked from one house to the next in a single file line. Those are my first memories, the rice fields changing with the seasons and the monks coming to our house each morning. And that is how I would like to remember Cambodia, quiet and beautiful and at peace. But in fact, the first entire incident I remember was not so peaceful. I was about 3 years old. The year was probably 1950. My mother sent my older brother and me into the rice fields to get water from a pond. It was the dry season. Soldiers from the village garrison fished at the pond with their shirts and shoes off. We filled the pail. My older brother took one end of a pole on his shoulder, and I took the other on mine, and we put the pail between us. We were returning to the house, 2 little barefoot boys carrying a single pail, when we heard a sharp bang behind us near the pond. Then we heard another bang, and the soldiers shouting. My mother appeared at the door. I had never seen that expression on her face before. "Come here, children! Put the pail down! Drop it right now! Hurry!" she said. We set the pail down and trotted obediently toward her. She ran out of the house anyway, grabbed us by the wrists and dragged us in. There was more shooting behind us, and our neighbors were yelling. The next thing I knew, my brother and I were in the hole under the big low wooden table that served as my parents' bed. It was dark and cool in there, with sandbags on the sides. My parents had known there was going to be trouble. Some of my older brothers and sisters were already under there, and more came tumbling in, a half-dozen wiggling children. Then my mother came in, and finally my father, who had run from the market and was breathing hard, his face wet with perspiration. We heard a shot nearby, then more shots right outside our house. Something crashed and glass broke on the tabletop above us, while my mother clutched us tighter and prayed and my father cursed. We children tried to make ourselves even smaller in our hole in the floor under the table. Then, after a while, there wasn't any more shooting. We heard voices outside. Someone called my father by his name. He climbed out. A few minutes later, the rest of us got out. There was broken glass on the floor and holes in the wall above the front door. Outside, there was a big crowd and more people running up to it on the street, and everybody was talking at the same time. "No, the rest got away. Nobody else killed. The soldiers got back to the garrison and fired down from the watchtower. He used this tree for cover. So many bullet holes in the trunk of the tree, huh? Even the doorway of the Nor house." I had pushed my way through the legs of the crowd. I had to see for myself. By the tree in front of our house, in the center of the crowd, a man lay face down in blood. Next to him was a single-shot carbine. Other children had wormed their way in with me, some of them with younger sisters or brothers hoisted on their hips. We looked on wide-eyed. The dead gorilla was sturdily built, with a strong back and thick legs. His bare feet were wide and calloused, like a farmer's. Tattoos covered his arms and shoulders. He wore a pair of torn short trousers. Around his waist were a krama, the Cambodian all-purpose scarf, and some strings hung with Buddha amulets and prayer beads. He had no shirt. He was not from the towns or cities. He was a man of the earth, from the countryside, from the very heart of peaceful Cambodia, and he had rebelled. Now, many years later, grown up and living far away, I think, yes, there was trouble even then. Maybe not revolution, but a deep, hidden discontent. To outsiders, and often even to ourselves, Cambodia looked peaceful enough. The farmers bound to their planting cycles, fishermen living on their boats and their naked brown children jumping in and out of the water. The robed monks, barefoot, walking with deliberate slowness on their morning rounds. Buddhist temples in every village, the graceful, multi-layered roofs rising above the trees. The wide boulevards and the flowering trees of our national capital, Phnom Penh. All that beauty and serenity was visible to the eye, but inside, hidden from sight the entire time, was Kum. Kum is a Cambodian word for a particularly Cambodian mentality of revenge. To be precise, a long-standing grudge leading to revenge much more damaging than the original injury. If I hit you with my fist and you wait 5 years and then shoot me in the back one dark night, that is Kum. Or if a government official steals a peasant's chickens and the peasant uses it as an excuse to attack a government garrison, like the one in my village, that is Kum. Cambodians know all about Kum. It is the infection that grows on our national soul. But the fighting had been so small scale back then, before the other countries got involved, that the damage was limited. When those few ragged guerrillas attacked the garrison in my village, it was only news for those of us who lived there. Nobody else cared. The attack might have been reported in the Phnom Penh newspapers, but not outside the country. It was only a minor incident in an inconclusive low-level civil war. Wars like this are always going on in different parts of the world, and those in the outside world know little about them. Cambodia. It is just a name to most people. Someplace far away where something terrible happened, and few can remember exactly what. Mention Pol Pot or the Khmer Rouge, and people start to remember. Or bombs dropping and genocide, or even a film called The Killing Fields. But all that came later. Cambodia is part of Indochina, which in turn is part of the landmass of Southeast Asia. Indochina because a couple of countries to the west lies India, which gave Cambodia its religion and alphabet, and a couple of countries to the north is China, which gave Cambodia its merchant class, including my father's side of the family. For many years, the region was known as French Indochina, because France colonized Cambodia and the neighboring countries of Laos and Vietnam beginning in the mid-19th century. The guerrillas who came to my village were trying to get rid of French rule, and in Vietnam at the same time as the shootout, Ho Chi Minh and his communists were also trying to force the French to leave, with a rebellion on a much larger scale. Vietnam has usually overshadowed Cambodia in world news, because the wars there are larger and because Western countries have gotten directly involved in the fighting. So more people know about Vietnam than Cambodia. But I have never liked having to explain that Cambodia is next to Vietnam, or even near India or China. To me, Cambodia means something very special. It is the name of the country around my village, and like all children, I believed my village was the center of the world. The village was called Samrongyong. It was a sleepy crossroads on the highway south of Phnom Penh, with houses 1 row deep and rice fields and forests beyond. After the shooting incident, my parents moved us children out of the village to a friend's house in the countryside, where they thought we would be safer. Every afternoon, my parents came to the house and spent the night with us, and every morning they went back to the village to do business at their dry goods store. Until one afternoon, Papa didn't come back. The guerrilla rebels kidnapped my father. My mother collected money for his release. After she paid them, they set my father free, but took her prisoner instead, so then Papa had to raise ransom money for her. When they were both free, corrupt soldiers of the other side, Cambodian officers of the French-backed government, arrested my father and put him in jail. They accused him of working for the guerrillas. After all, he had been seen leaving Samrongyong every afternoon to visit them. Of course, the soldiers were using this as an excuse for getting ransom money. I was sent to stay in Phnom Penh. While I was there, the rebels and the military took turns kidnapping my father again. My father hated paying ransom, but there was nothing he could do. He had nobody to protect him. Like nearly all merchants, he was Chinese-looking, with pale-colored skin and narrow eyes. This made him an easy target. Most other Cambodians were of the Khmer race, with round eyes and dark brown skin, or else were of mixed racial descent. When I finally came back to the village, the rice fields looked the same. The monks still made their rounds in the morning, but every afternoon a new militia of young men and women marched around the village with machetes and wooden rifles. They were always out of step and never looked like a real army, but they had the strong support of the people. The whole village was tired of the corrupt soldiers of the French-backed government and tired of the corrupt guerrillas too. The man who had helped organize the militias, our young king Norodom Sihanouk, felt the same. Sihanouk was trying to get the French to leave the country. He wanted the guerrillas to leave too, because some of them were communists allied with Ho Chi Minh. Sihanouk didn't want the country ruled either by a Western power like France or by communists. He wanted Cambodia to be independent and neutral. In the Buddhist tradition, he wanted the middle way. Because of all the ransom payments, my father was very poor. He sent me to a Chinese school with my older brother, Feng War, but soon he took me out because he couldn't afford the tuition for both of us. I didn't mind. Feng War was smarter than me. He could take an abacus, the Chinese calculator with rows of wooden beads, flick the beads around with the tip of his finger, and get the answer to a problem in seconds, while I would still be trying to remember what each bead stood for. Feng War had always helped my father after school. I had always helped my mother. My mother was darker in color, like me, partway between a Chinese and a dark rural Cambodian. While my father rebuilt his business and my brother studied at school, my mother and I went off on daily bartering trips in the countryside to get the family's food. I carried a long piece of bamboo across my shoulders with a hook at each end. From one hook hung a basket with fresh pastries cooked by my hard-working father, and from the other hung another basket with peanuts, dried fish, salt, soy sauce, and anything else we thought we could trade. At sunrise, we were off on foot. The baskets bobbed up and down from my shoulder board, and I adjusted my stride to fit the rhythm. My mother wrapped her krama or scarf around her head and placed the basket on top, steadying it with one hand. We walked away from National Route 2, the paved highway that passed through our village, onto ox-cart trails and footpaths. Soon we were out of earshot of the automobile traffic and into an entirely different world of fields and forests.